Imagine opening the front door of a Chicago apartment in the year 1933. Outside, the city is moving. Streetcars rattle along the tracks. Elevated trains thunder overhead. Children run through narrow streets and brick alleys. And somewhere nearby, a man who once had a steady job is standing in a line, waiting for a meal. But behind one of these apartment doors, life continues. There is a family sitting around a table. There is food, perhaps not much, but enough for tonight. There is a stove that must be kept burning. There are children who still want to play, and there are parents trying to protect them from a world that seems to be falling apart. This is the story of what everyday life could look like inside a Chicago home during the Great Depression. Not the story of presidents, not the story of Wall Street, but the story of ordinary people trying to get through another day. Before we step inside, look closely at the building itself. Many Chicago families lived in modest apartments or crowded tenements. Space was limited, privacy was limited, and money was even more limited. For a family struggling through the Depression, every room had a purpose. The kitchen wasn't simply a place to cook. It was where the family gathered. It was where children did their homework, where adults talked about money, where meals were stretched as far as possible. And during the coldest months, it could become the warmest room in the entire home. The walls might show years of wear. Paint could peel, plaster could crack. But these homes were not empty. They were filled with the sounds of ordinary life. A radio playing in the background, a baby crying, someone washing dishes, children arguing over a toy, and perhaps, for a few minutes, laughter. The Great Depression had taken away many things, but it had not taken away the human need to create a home. Now look at the dining table. To a modern viewer, a loaf of bread might seem completely ordinary, but during the Depression, food could carry an entirely different meaning. Families learned to stretch meals. Leftovers were saved. Nothing was wasted if it could possibly be eaten later. A simple meal could become tomorrow's lunch, and tomorrow's lunch might become part of the next day's dinner. The people sitting around this table were living through a period when millions of Americans had lost their jobs. Factories had closed, businesses had failed, banks had collapsed, and families who had once lived comfortably could suddenly find themselves struggling to afford the basics. The most frightening part was that nobody knew exactly when it would end. A parent could look at their children and wonder a question that no parent wants to ask. How long can we keep this going? That question was repeated in homes across America, but children often experienced the Depression differently. They didn't always understand the economy. They understood that their parents were worried. They understood when money was tight, but they could still find happiness in the smallest things. A game in the street, a ball made from whatever materials were available, a trip to the movie theater when the family could afford it. For children, even during difficult times, childhood continued. Now look at the stove. It may appear to be just another object in an old photograph, but inside a 1930s home, a stove could be the center of family life. It provided heat, it cooked meals, it boiled water. It helped a family survive the winter. Keeping it running was work, real work. Someone had to find fuel, someone had to prepare the fire, someone had to cook, someone had to clean. And when temperatures dropped, the warmth from that stove could mean the difference between comfort and misery. For many women, household work during this period was physically exhausting. There were no modern conveniences we take for granted today. Washing clothes could take hours. Preparing meals required constant effort. And when money was scarce, every ingredient had to be carefully considered. A family couldn't simply replace something they had run out of. They had to improvise, they had to repair, they had to reuse, and they had to make do. The phrase, making do, may sound simple, but for millions of families, it became a way of life. But here's the part of the Great Depression that is sometimes forgotten. People still lived. They fell in love. They got married. They had children. They went to the movies. They listened to music, they gathered with friends, they laughed, because even during the worst economic crisis of their lives, people still needed moments of happiness. Perhaps that is why entertainment became so important. For a few hours, a movie theater could provide an escape. Music could make people forget their problems. A conversation with a neighbor could make a difficult day feel slightly easier. The depression was real, the hunger was real, the unemployment was real, but so was the resilience. And perhaps that's the true story of life in 1930s Chicago. It wasn't simply a story about poverty. It was a story about people trying to maintain their humanity while living through extraordinary hardship. So the next time you see an old photograph from the 1930s, look a little closer. Don't just see an old building. See the family that lived inside. Don't just see an old kitchen. Think about the person who woke up before sunrise to light the stove. Don't just see children playing in the street. Think about the parents who couldn't afford to buy them expensive toys, but watched them create entire worlds from almost nothing. And don't just see a man standing in an unemployment line. Remember that he may have been someone's father, someone's husband, someone who had dreams. The Great Depression eventually ended. The factories began to reopen. A new generation grew up, and America moved forward. But the people who lived through those years carried the lessons with them. They learned to save. They learned to repair. They learned not to waste. And perhaps most importantly, they learned that even when everything seems uncertain, life continues. Families continue. Children continue to dream, and people continue to hope. This was life inside an ordinary Chicago home during one of the most difficult periods in American history. A time when people had very little, but somehow they kept going.